Hey, friends. We're going to get started here in just a couple minutes. My name's Maria. I am the executive director of Ministar, and we are a nonprofit organization that builds, nurtures, and engages those interested in technology through meaningful connection. And we put on a lot of different events in the tech community here in Minnesota, and this is one of them. This is Mini AMA. If you've never been, it's our twice monthly virtual interactive education series where we bring on subject matter experts to answer your questions live. And we have some incredible subject matter experts with us today. So we will be getting to that in just a second. But first off, we want to make sure that you can hear us okay. And also we want to know who you are. So in the chat, which you can access on the right-hand side if you are on a desktop, let us know who you are. Oh, hey, Jen. Can he see and hear perfectly? Fantastic. Yeah, let us know who you are, where you're tuning in from. So there is that chat functionality that I mentioned. There's also, if you look down at the bottom, there's an ask a question functionality. Either one of those, throughout the entire hour that we have together, if you have questions for our panelists, drop them in either one of those and we will volley them back to them. So I'll be monitoring that and I'll be moderating for us today. So, all right. So a couple housekeeping items. We just kind of went through that. If you haven't used Crowdcast before, those are the two ways that we will be engaging. But first things first, I know I introduced myself. Hey, Chad, Texas, awesome. Oh, lots of love for Lane and Josh. That's awesome. Hey, Dylan, Agile coach and collaboration artist from the Twin Cities here. Fantastic. Well, welcome. And Christy, hey. If you are not familiar with Prime Digital Academy, you should definitely look it up. Fantastic, fantastic boot camp education program here in the Twin Cities. Awesome. We are pumped to have you all here today. So I introduced myself, but I want Lane and Josh to be able to introduce themselves. So yeah, a little bit about yourself, but also I'm curious if you can think back to your first speaking experience, whether it was pair talk or whether it was solo. So Lane, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. Can I get someone to verify you can hear me since I am on different audio than Maria? And I'll just keep talking and assume that you can. Yay, thank you, Jessica, sweet. All right, so I'm Lane Miner, and I am based in Michigan. I work for Red Hat. We both do, actually. We have a lot of commonality in our intros, so usually whoever goes first kind of steals the other one, so I guess that's me today. And I'm a solutions architect, which if you're not familiar with that title, basically it means that I am a nerd with an IT background who supports a sales team. So like a sales team will go and talk to customers and I come in as a technical resource. I specialize in OpenShift, the container platform, and in adoption of that. So sort of scaling that out once it's already in an organization. And I recently switched roles to cover the Minnesota and Wisconsin area, even though I'm based in Michigan, because everything's remote right now. And also like I can fly when that's not a thing anymore. And which is how I ended up connected with Ministar. My boss knew that Josh and I speak. We speak at Red Hat. We speak outside of Red Hat. And he's like, hey, you should talk to these people. And so that was how this came to be. My first speaking experience. So before Red Hat, I worked for an insurance company in Michigan. And I was a COBOL developer straight out of college because that's what they needed. And they were willing to teach me. And then I was a Java developer, and then I was a Pega developer. If you've ever heard of Pega, business rules processing.
If you haven't, you should.
Yeah. Not even a Red Hat product. Like,
no,
good job,
it's just
you.
Good.
Yeah.
It's okay. Background, everyone picks on me for loving Pega.
Yeah.
I'm maybe the biggest Pega fan outside of the CEO, and everybody picks on me for it.
I don't
Pega nerds over here. It's awesome.
Yeah. I like Pega a lot. So I had a lot of good learn how to be an architect roots in Pega. And then I was an architect for a team that did like development support and build and deployment automation and that kind of stuff. So we had a pretty good internal IT community there. And it kind of got even better over time. And so we did a lot of like talks to a group, like just like the group that you're in. I did a lot of speaking there. And we also had public like tech talks that would be sort of like the version of remote, even though everyone was in the same place, people would just dial in. And then we also had like developer days, 2 weeks every year where people could just present on whatever they want. And I presented at one of those by myself and with a different person, which is interesting. And I was very like, I'm going to be very formal and proper and stiff kind of, even though that's, I mean, my hair's
very professional
blue. So you can see how accurate that was in terms of me, you know? Yeah, very professional. I'm going to use air quotes, professional. And then to also steal part of your answer, probably, we did one of those tech talks together because we worked at the other place before together as well. And as we were prepping for it, I noticed in the slides that there was like fun introduced in the slides. And I'm like, wait, what? Like you can have fun when you give a talk. I don't, what?
Insert
Yeah, insert fun, like insert being yourself really was what it was. And so the first talk that we gave together was actually also the first time for me personally that I realized that I could give a presentation and be myself. And that if I combine those two things, it was a blast. Like it was just so much fun. And I've kind of been hooked on it ever since. So
nice.
Yeah. And I think it was also really good. You touched on it, but to be yourself, right? You are not naturally a reserved, quiet person. So it was
just stick at the podium, no eye contact.
Boring.
Maybe move
boring.
one arm vertically, and that's it. So I think it was really good to be able to flow and be yourself. So my first speaking experience, wow. I've always been kind of loud, so I'm not sure what counts first. But, yeah, I mean, kind of the same story. We both worked at the same insurance company, and our careers kind of interweaved and then stuck together after Pega. And yeah, I remember being like a new Pega developer and Lane was like a Pega architect. And I was like, this person has their stuff together. But I think my first speaking experience was solo. And I was speaking like at a church, actually, at adult Sunday school. And my feelings on religion are a whole complicated other thing.
It's a whole different AMA.
That I'm not going to get into. But I definitely remember like preparing content and trying to put an arc together and say something compelling and useful and having no idea how to do that as a young person. And then learning a lot with those reps because I think experience really matters. And I think actually partnering is another good way to get more experience because you learn so much better when working with someone else, like so much better because you're like, oh, you do that thing. I don't know how to do that. How do you do that? So not to spoil the rest of our AMA, but that's, I think, a really good way to gain experience that I didn't have when I started out.
I mean, this is such good content already. We do have, yeah, nailed it. Awesome. We should just end right now. Yeah, no, that's great. We did have a few questions that came in beforehand, but as we're talking, definitely drop any and all of your questions in here. We were just talking a little bit before we started about how many conferences that maybe were put on hold because of COVID are now coming back online. How many have shifted their model a little bit, now moving to virtual. And so a lot more people are prepping for talks again. And so as we're going through this, if you have questions or if you're feeling a little rusty or if you've never done a peer talk before, drop them in either the chat or the ask a question area. So you both kind of touched on this, your origin stories of professional talking, you will. But I'm curious, as we're starting to talk about this, what do you wish that you knew when you first think about your first pair talk, right? what do you wish that you knew in that experience? What did you learn from it?
Wow, you chortled. I feel like you should take.
No, I have to gather my my first answer. I will not answer, so you have to go first.
Okay, I'll go first.
Great, professionalism.
Right, we're very professional and boring. So if just from a logistics standpoint, actually, one of the things that we figured out, if you happen to have ever seen us do a pair talk, we use avatars in our talks. So we use them like on a slide to introduce ourselves. Like the most common that we use is Ron Swanson and Leslie Knope from Parks and Recreation, because there are some parallels there. That's all I'm going to say. And we do that actually in part because of that. We help give people sort of a snapshot introduction to us before we even really say anything. And also one thing that we learned logistically in terms of what I had known before, what I wish I had known before, was we use little versions of the pictures when it's time to switch slides. So we make all the content together, or Josh will take a pass at it and then I'll take a pass at it and whatever. And then we argue about it a lot and, all's fine. But the actual presenting, we typically, even though we will often interrupt each other or provide additional clarity, we have like, well, these slides, you're going to lead, like you'll drive these and then it'll be me and then it'll be you, which is why Josh said his brain was like, well, I'm 20 minutes in, it's time for a break now, because that's, the split sometimes. So we used the little pictures on the slide itself so that we know when to switch. And we tried speaker notes, which we actually never use ever. We tried like printing out a piece of paper with, well, on slide 7, it's your turn, and on slide 12, it's my turn. That didn't work, because as soon as you add or rearrange slides, which we do all the time, that all falls down. Plus you have to know the slide numbers, which is sometimes hard. So that was the biggest logistical, like how to actually execute presenting together thing that I wish we had known earlier than we did.
Yeah. And so I thought back to the time when we were first, I was and you were first pair talking, and I was like, there are so many more important things I wish I knew, like the price of Bitcoin in 2021, or all of the stuff that's happened to me. Mm-hmm. And so I think many important things would have been nice to know back then. But I think one thing that's very relevant to what we do is understanding the partner's capability for content creation. So some people are really good at delivering content, less good at putting it together in a way that makes sense, either slides or notes, some way to be presented. And there's other skills like making a cohesive process, right? Like if you want to give a talk, you want to start from somewhere, engage, and then tell a story or have some sort of arc to it, and then get to a conclusion and let's go do something. Or now you want to get to somewhere interesting. And I think being able to put that arc together is a whole separate set of skills. It's a little narrative, it's a little storytelling. And then origination of ideas is a whole nother capability in content creation. And one of the things that I've had to learn with every speaking partner, but most commonly with Lane, is like, who is the best at that for this topic? Because it sometimes changes by topic. And typically I'm better at origination and kind of like getting an idea down on paper, like the first creation, right? And then you take the raw materials and kind of make something that makes a little more sense out of it. And sometimes I take another pass, and so we do this, we have this process by which we go through all of the steps necessary to create what we think is good content. It seems to be pretty good. And then we get to the end and we're like, I hope this is good. Usually I'm the one who's like, this is garbage.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You think it's garbage after you take a pass at it. And I look at it, I'm like, no, I know what to do with this. And then you're like, okay, maybe it's not garbage. And then it's done. And actually when it's done, I'm the one, like we switch. Like, this is terrible. No one's ever going to care about any of this. It's not going to make any sense, which is another benefit of having a partner in content creation and delivery, because then I think anybody who does anything creative in content creation and delivery, even if it's on an IT topic, it is massively creative. I think if you do anything creative, you have those moments of like crippling self-doubt, like this is horrible and nobody will care. And also they'll hate me just because I said it or whatever. And it's nice to have someone who knows the content well enough that you might believe what they say. Because people can be like, I'm sure it's great. And I'll be like, you don't even know. don't know what it is. Like,
Yeah, that perspective is probably the final and most important content creation skill, which is this is worth shipping.
Yeah.
Yes. And this is really resonating in the chat. As you can see, like Christy is like content creation plus content delivery. It's great presentation.
Yep.
And, Jeremy talking about, we all need someone over our shoulders to tell us that we're not producing garbage. It's so true. And I know that there are a ton of people that are in here right now that I know are like founders or teams of one that resonates as well, right? So one of the things that you were talking about is just like, excuse me, for lack of a better term, right person, right seat, if you like do the traction mindset stuff, right? And making sure that you're leveraging your skill sets appropriately when it comes to the planning and the execution of it. And I think this ties really well into this question from Dylan. So Dylan is asking, thinking of venturing into pair talking, and I wonder what you think about, does it work to have a pair where one has a great deal of experience presenting / talking and the other is very new?
That is a really good question. And it ties into something else that I think probably we love a lot, which is mentorship. And I think pairing with somebody who you have invested in that kind of relationship with them, like that's one way that can happen, where one person has a lot of experience and someone else doesn't. And I think, kind of like Josh alluded to already, you can learn a great deal from presenting with somebody else and sort of steal bits of their style or their execution, or like how did you know like how to answer that question that came up, or how did you keep your cool when the question came up that you didn't know the answer to? And so I think that can work a lot. I think it is probably more work for both people. So I think you should plan for that. I think plan for the content to take longer, plan for the person who's newer to have to learn how much practice they need before giving a talk, because that varies even between the two of us. It varies wildly. I don't practice because it psychs me out really badly. But Josh, you need like 2 or 3 run-throughs of something before we present it if it's new, to feel like it's like in your head appropriately. So just plan for it to all take longer. But I think, at least from a mentorship perspective, there's a ton of potential value there. If it's not a mentorship relationship, then I think it depends on why you would do that. I assume there'd be a reason. If it's like because your boss is making you, that's probably not going to work very well unless you really like the person. Because the chemistry between the speakers is very, very important. The ability to read each other and trust each other and all of that, it's vitally important.
Yeah, it touches on something that I think is really important to pair talking, which is to have a relationship outside of the talk. Mm-hmm. We've seen other people pair talk, and we can tell when they go out of the talk and high five each other and then go get drinks or whatever, or versus people who are sort of like, I know you and I don't want to be on stage, but we have to, right? So I would just encourage that
the world's most public and worst group project.
Exactly.
Yeah. I would encourage that you partner with someone that you like. But I do think it can be really, really helpful, because there are 2 levels of teaching any topic, especially technical. There's, I don't know anything, and I need to know enough to just ask good questions. And then there's like the crawl and then walk and then run model, right? Like, and then there's like, let's get into really how we would do this and take it to a deeper level. And I've noticed that when I give a presentation on something I know a lot about, I forget what it's like to not know anything about it. And having someone really new to the subject really helps make the talk better.
Yeah, and it just kind of made me think a little bit, Dylan, on that question. One of the things that we see a lot of different talks that Ministar puts on, or Mini Bar, which is the nation's largest unconference, right? And so that is completely open no matter what level you are. It's not like a formal vetted process. And so we see a lot of people where it's their first one. If you have a session that, of course, it depends on the topic, where you have someone who is very senior and someone who is very junior, sometimes that can lend itself to some of the most incredible conversations. Because and there are some times that we've had AMAs where we select people specifically with that in mind, right? Because one of the things that we want to touch on is What does this look like from a junior's perspective, or what does this look like from a senior's perspective? And so it just is all like going back to kind of what both of you two were talking about, of like, what are the skill sets that you bring to the table? And if you're a junior, don't automatically assume that you don't have skill sets to bring to that conversation.
Yeah. No, especially for presenting, because so much of presenting is just, it's not about what you know. It's about how you can talk about it and how you can explain it and how you can interact with the people in the room. And none of that comes from technical knowledge. I hate this. It's soft skills. I hate that term because they're so much more difficult than like Googling technology. I mean, really kind of anybody can do that. So yeah, I mean, I would agree. Don't ever assume that you don't have something to bring to the table. And also, what's really funny and kind of related, one of the things that I am better at between the two of us is visual communication, like adding in pictures or using pictures to tell a story. Or I'm kind of famous for adding in animation, and he won't know it's there. And he's like, I don't understand where the rest of the slide went, but it's fine. It's because I think it helps to visually walk people through sometimes. And I have ADD, so audio only information is really difficult for me to even be able to understand, which is a lot of fun in a COVID world, let me tell you. But so having the visual helps me understand it too. And I didn't know that I was any good at that. In fact, I insisted that I was terrible at visual communication until I talked to somebody where we used to work, actually, who was famously amazing at it. And I was like, okay, explain to me how you do this. And he did. Because he's good at visual communication. He whiteboarded how to visually communicate. And I was like, oh, I get it now. So whatever skills people think they don't have, first of all, you might be wrong. It's really easy to be wrong about yourself. That's just a thing. Second of all, you can learn them. So yeah, don't ever let that stop you from doing what you think you're supposed to be doing or what you love to do.
Goes back to Jeremy's comment of like, telling us that we're not producing garbage. Like, you know, believe in yourself.
It's not all garbage, Jeremy.
Not all garbage.
It's not all garbage.
It's really good, whatever it is.
Well, reminder to throw questions that you have in the chat or at the Ask a Question section. But some of the, one of the things that we were touching on earlier, both of you actually did, was on dividing up roles and responsibilities when it comes to pair talks, right? And you two have known each other for a long time. You know what your strengths are, all of that. I'm curious about how would you, if you, let's say you were assigned someone at work, like let's say your boss was like, I think you two would work really well together, go forth and do a talk, right? How would you start that process of dividing up roles, responsibilities, and how would you navigate if there was maybe not a conflict, but like overlapping areas of expertise or passion about the topic at hand?
So I would, whenever I work with someone, I want to make sure we're aiming with the same end goal in mind. So that would be the first conversation I would have is, why are we giving this talk and what are we hoping to get out of it? Are we trying to enlighten? Are we trying to encourage a course of action? Are we trying, like, what are we here for? And once that's figured out, everything else kind of falls into line, because if there's some conflict and I can see how the other person is really trying to aim for the big goal, I don't care. Like, I really don't care how they do it, as long as we're all on the same page going in the same direction. And not everybody works that way, I guess. I don't know. I just know for me, I am sold out on whatever the end goal is, and however we get there together doesn't matter. And I think it really, really helps to jump in with your strengths. So my strengths are not making things look good. It's just not my strength, right? I work with a bunch of people who can make slides look really, really good, or make a layout, like a brochure, things like that. Not my strength. But you know what I am good at is taking an idea and turning it into a bunch of content that could be cleaned up. And what I found was not everybody can do that. So I just lead with what I'm good at. I'm just like, let's go here. Okay, we're gonna go there. I have a bunch of ideas. I'm going to write them down, and because that's my strength. and then let's get back together. And I'm also really good at organization. So I'm like, let's get back together and figure out where we are so we don't drop the ball. Because that's one of the most important parts about group projects. Just regular touch base to say, here we are. And they'll say, well, some of this is actual garbage, but I get what you're going with here, and I can take this and run with it. And then I think another thing that's key for me is not letting my ego get in the way, which used to be a real problem for me. Like I was like, no, this is super important. But then what I realized was like impact is way more important than who gets the credit. And so I just like let other people have whatever they want, and then we can, as long as we're headed towards that end goal. And usually that works pretty well. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the reason I kind of looked at you and was like, you should answer this one is because you're better at that than I am. Like I am capable of working with other people mostly. But what I tend to do is I get excited, and my mental processes and my rate of speech and my execution rate, it speeds up, and it speeds up to the point where if I'm not careful, people tend to feel a little bit like railroaded, which is not my intent. Actually, I just sort of assume like we have a thing to do, so let's do it. And I am actually not great at remembering to like slow down and check in with people and be like, what do you bring to the table? I think the only thing that is really important for making dual content that actually feels like it's a product of both people is being able to conflict. And I kind of alluded to that already, saying like we argue about content. It's not like a fight, but we bicker about content all the time, because we also have a blog that we try really hard to publish weekly, but it turns out that's a lot of work. So weekly-ish, but all kinds of content. And we have to be able to be like, well, either I don't understand what you were going for with this, or that doesn't make any sense, or even as something as simple as the grammar on that sentence is a little weird. Like, what were you trying to say? And if you can't have that kind of honest talk with whoever you've been assigned or whatever, the content will come out sort of stilted and probably unclear. And so I think as an initial starting point, you also kind of have to establish that, at least say, for myself, I really would like you to be honest with me if something that I'm doing in this doesn't make any sense. And typically that can help open the door for the other person to be like, oh, right, no, okay, so this is not a threatening environment. This is like let's make this good sort of environment.
Yeah. All edits and comments and feedback are welcome.
Yeah.
And that really depends on what culture you're in. We work for Red Hat, which is a very, very open and healthy culture. I mean, it's crazy. It's like a gigantic semi-dysfunctional family that argues all the time. But it's really, really, really good for like, hey, I have ideas about how to make this better, because we're an open source company. That's what we do. We take existing things and make them way more awesome. So I think that's a good thing in our culture, and it's a good thing wherever I went. I would want to have that same thing where feedback is open and welcome. Yeah. That is my personal culture. And you are welcome to do that. And I would be curious if you would be open to my feedback as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think topic selection is important, but partner selection is just as important if you're going to do a partner talk. Like you can make it work with anybody, but if you have someone, it's like a three-legged race, right? I don't know if anyone's ever run a three-legged race. Some people I can run real fast because it's just natural in a three-legged race. I don't know why this come up, but when I was a kid, I ran a lot of three-legged races.
It stuck in your brain.
Yeah, and this one guy, we ran faster together than we did separately. But everybody else, the pace was different, which you talked about, and the stride length and who did what was all messed up, and we couldn't run. And I think there's something there about having the right person makes the talk much stronger. So, think about that and try it. There's no way to know. Like, I didn't know when I first started working with Lane that we would work together like perfectly. But you have to kind of try it and figure out what your own strengths are. So I would encourage people just to give it a shot and work through what they're good at and who fits their gaps really well.
Yeah. So what do you look for in a good co-speaker?
I got distracted by the chat. Sorry.
No, we're going to get to because Dylan's question hits on what you were talking about with like vulnerability, right? But I'm curious, since you brought it up, what do you look for in a good co-speaker?
I look for someone who honestly, it's someone with whom I have a good relationship outside. I mean, often it happens because we have some sort of overlapping interest at work. I mean, I speak all the time. I speak to customers. I speak internally to other people. We speak on the no fluff, just stuff conference tour outside of Red Hat, but that's us, again, not other people. But it's really important that I feel like I can get along with the person, because I am not stilted or professional. And if that makes the other person uncomfortable, like, to know that I'm probably going to be a little silly because that's who I am. And I think it makes it easier on me for sure. I think it also makes me speaking more engaging. Like, it's going to throw them off entirely. It's going to make the talk terrible. It's really people who I like, as simplistic as that sounds.
Yeah. So there are many different ways that you can approach a talk. You can have two people that basically say the same thing in three parts, like beginning, middle, end. Mm-hmm. And the alternation between them is interesting because they have different styles and pacing, but they're saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. Or you can have two people present two different sides of an argument, and that's interesting for a different reason. So you don't even need to agree with the person you're giving a talk with. Like, you could have a little mini organized fight on stage. We've done talks like that. Those are really fun. You can have someone who really knows the subject deeply and someone who's new, like you talked about. So there's that's not what matters. Like, as long as you like each other and you will want to show up for those touch bases where we talk about, like, we do the content, and you're both committed to the end goal and want to work on it, you don't even need to have one person, you don't need to mix who does the content. One person can make every single slide, but if the other person is willing to contribute and they're both happy and they like each other, I've seen those talks. Mm-hmm. This guy knows all the content, and this person doesn't know the slides, but knows the topic really well, mm-hmm. and can add color. Like, none of it matters as long as you like each other and you both want to do the same thing in the end. And then the rest you can figure out. Like, just know that that's okay. I think that would be my big lesson is, mm-hmm. there doesn't have to be a particular structure where you have two different, Parks and Rec characters and you alternate slides. The important part is that you want to be able to figure it out, and have fun doing it. You like the other person enough that it's fun. And that's what I try to do when I'm not working with Lane, is find someone that cares about the end goal and likes working with me, and then it all works out.
Mm-hmm. And to Christy's point, adding a little humor goes a long way. Let's circle back to Dylan's question, because as we were talking originally about your current work environment experience, really fostering an environment that's very open. Probably you mentioned, your open source company, but also the company culture has to be fostering that as well, right? Okay. So Dylan's question is, what is a good balance of sharing your vulnerability/doubt? This feels really important to him, without negating your role as the person or people who are leading a room in the discussion?
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting question. And I think it comes back to so we have a thing that we say, sort of like life lessons condensed into something really easy to remember, which is be you and have fun. And that applies to kind of everything as a sort of a touchstone for what to do. And I don't mean have fun, don't take your life seriously, but have fun in the way that you execute your life, and be yourself while you do it. So for me, I don't ever try to maintain a role of leading a conversation, because that's not, to me, I'm not actually trying to lead. We have a thing that we typically say when we start a presentation, which is if we don't get through all of our slides because we're too busy talking about it, because this topic resonates with all of you who are listening, that's a good thing, actually. We consider that to be a win. You can look at the slides later and email us if you have questions. So for us, it always ends up better if it is more of a conversation, actually. And I tend to run toward vulnerability as opposed to away from it, in the vein of keeping some sort of leader role. But that's me. That I do that because that's me, and that's how I execute. Exactly. So, if someone else is more inclined to be more comfortable, or it is really more in their wheelhouse to be leading the conversation, then that's how you should balance it. You should balance it how It is sort of you sharing your content and your soul and your ideas and all of that. However, that is easy is how you should do it.
And I think it's really important to know what you're trying to do and where you want to end up, right?
Yeah.
Like Lane said, the goal of when we give a talk often is to enlighten the audience on a topic and sometimes move towards a goal, or sometimes just move towards educating. And so in that situation, them asking deeper questions is actually good. Like, forget the back half of my slides.
Yeah.
If you have a problem and we need to talk about it in detail right now, we can cover those slides later, right? But other times you have another goal in mind, and don't be not yourself. So if you're naturally vulnerable and you want to open up about yourself and that moves towards the goal, and I'll give an example in a second, good. But if you need to come in and say, look, everybody, I'm the expert. I really know a lot of stuff. Now, you don't have to believe me. Like, you can't control people. Like, that's terrible in a talk. But what you can say is, here's why you should listen to me. It's a really good idea to listen to me. I know a lot of stuff about what you need to know about, and I strongly encourage you to listen to me. And then go and give your spiel. Like, that can be really important, because I've seen people come in and give a presentation, and I knew they knew this topic better than anyone in the room. And I knew that the people in the room needed to understand it desperately, because I cared both about them and I wanted them to connect. But the person came in and they were like, well, I don't know, maybe some false vulnerability because someone told them that was a good speaking topic. Like, I don't know. And then they kind of didn't really cover that, like, you should listen, because I know I know the answer to your problem. And that fell flat. But on the other hand, I mean, if you come in and you say, like, I have broken Kubernetes more ways than, like, I want to talk about right now, but as a result of that, I understand how to run containers like, this is kind of my job, right? I understand how to run containers in production, and I've done it, and I've dealt with developers, and I've done that. And you are having a problem with Kubernetes in production. I know that. So let's talk about that, and let me share my experiences, and then we can move forward to find a solution together. And that's a mix of, I'm not perfect, and vulnerability. And I would even tell a story about that one time when I broke that one node because I didn't know, right? But also, and funny, because you don't take yourself too seriously. And then also, but I know what I'm talking about, so we should pay attention. We should have a real conversation now, because if you don't set that stage as someone worth listening to, which we kind of did here. We've given tons of talk. That's kind of implied in this very thing.
Format, yeah.
But like, we know what we're talking about, and we're confident, and you can kind of read that coming off of us. But also we laughed, and we were like, yeah, but we kind of had to figure that out, right? Like, what? So I think there's just a balance there. And the key thing, just connecting back to what Lane said, is be your authentic self and figure out how to have fun being you, which is like apex level adulting. But if you can do that, you will have great success.
It's so true, though. I mean, we had an AMA on basically advice for new managers, like for people that, maybe it's your first engineering management gig or whatever, right? And I think that the authenticity piece of that is so true. I remember my first year managing people, and I was looking to all these other people who had these great leadership styles, but it wasn't mine, and trying to and so I feel I know that the first few times that I've done a talk too, I've made that same mistake where I was trying to emulate a style that was not authentic to who I am. Anyone that's been to a Mini-Star event knows that I like talk with my hands. I'm like super very informal. I'm doing it right now, and I'm aware of it. But you see others, and you're like, oh, maybe, and then it starts the whole imposter syndrome of like, what is a good talk, right? And so I love that, because I think that just that idea of authenticity and that balancing of vulnerability and confidence just applies across the board, I would say. So kudos to that. And Jeremy also loves that. So
Thanks. And just to answer his other question or comment, I have only recently adopted wearing Hawaiian shirts because I realized I was old enough and I got to old man level and I could just wear whatever I wanted. And Hawaiian shirts, good ones, are so comfortable. Just perfectly comfortable. So, I mean, you got a tattoo and you were like, no, I need to wear a comfy shirt because, and Hawaiian shirts work for that.
Yeah. Yep. It was great.
Well, here's another question came through, and actually I find this one really interesting. So, we're talking about pair talks, right? So is there a setting where a pair talk maybe wouldn't work as well? Maybe a solo one would work better, and vice versa? Like, is there a setting that you've noticed that a pair talk works better than a solo?
So, so being in a sales role, I'm in IT sales, but it's still sales. There's a thing, sort of bit of sales wisdom, which is that you don't want to outnumber the customers. Like, so a sales team, if you've never worked on a sales team, there's like 15 different roles, and depending on how the organization is structured, there can be more, and there can be like specialists and non-specialists, and who knows what that person over there does, and you're giggling in the background. It's great.
Yeah.
But
I'm gonna
keep
it together.
Good luck with that. An AMA on like sales horror stories would probably be a lot of fun, but
we would have to wear like V for Vendetta masks, but I would do that. I would so sign up for how to not get good vendors. Anyway, so if you're going to outnumber the people, and if the person who you would bring in, so we aren't assigned the same accounts as an example. So if like his account doesn't know me, or if there's already a lot of vendor representatives there, like you're not going to bring in someone else without a reason. And sometimes it's hard to explain the benefit of having more than one speaker in a way that's clear or metricable, if you will. So if you're saying, well, why do I need another resource? It's like, well, you don't need another resource, but also we're better at relaying information together. But in that kind of situation, sometimes it's easier to just solo it, or go with someone who's already going to be there if you want another speaker. Otherwise, I will lean toward pair speaking, especially with Josh, if at all possible, just because of all of the benefits to it, the mental load benefits and the comfort level benefits and the content creation, like workload benefits and all of it. I don't know of any other situation where a pair talk isn't better and where it doesn't come across better. But again, if you don't have the kind of relationship that actually where a pair talk actually does execute better, then I would say go it alone at that point. So you have to be really self-aware, but not go to the like everything I do is terrible place, but aware of the impact that you have alone or as part of a team. Yeah, and adding on to that, I would say, if you don't have someone who you have a good relationship with, who is tasked with the same thing, or like can dedicate time to it, you just don't have, like I said, have a shared goal and find the right person. If you can't do one of those things, don't worry about it. And the other thing that makes sense to me is if there isn't enough time between when you need to deliver the content and like to really sync up and build that relationship. Like if you just got to knock something, like I have to give a talk on a thing on Friday and it isn't one of Lane's customers. So I'm just going to do that myself because we don't have time to prep, and it's also not like super critical. But if I'm out and there's a really cool thing that we're both excited about, or I'm excited with someone else about, and there's time, do it. It comes back to relationships and shared goals. That's the bottom line.
And also how you yourself execute. Yeah. Some people actually, I imagine, execute better on their own. Like even to the point of giving the talk. I am a weird sort of mix along the spectrum of introvert and extrovert, and it really kind of depends on the day. But sometimes like I don't want to be around other people. I don't want to have to involve them in my process because of a matter of time or a matter of importance or just because other reasons, whatever.
Yeah, so, it's sort of like, not to be a little too weird or anything, but it's a little like relationships, right? If you find the right person, then you can be happy. And if you don't, then maybe you just haven't found the right person yet. Or maybe you're not, you just are better working solo. You know, like it might just be how your soul works.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, you know, and we were talking about this a little bit before we got started, but it's no surprise that we are in a global pandemic still. I know. As two people who have had a long career in in-person talks and pair talks, and the whole process behind that, right? So the planning and the execution. How did you have to navigate this? I know you do a lot of virtual conference talks. Like, did you change anything? How did you navigate that?
So the audio and like the video and the microphone settings and, you know, all of that is something that is in constant state of flux. When we were talking about it before, I was joking, like I've seen several Red Hatters who went a little bit to the dark side, as nerds sometimes do with their like at home setup, where they're like, I have 7 microphones and 12 lights pointed at me at all times, and you can't see it because I just look like I woke up like this. No big deal, you know, like that kind of thing, which we did not do. But it's still really important that people can hear us and see us. And one of the things that is the hardest is the audience interaction, because we, like I said, we tend to lean very strongly toward let's have a conversation. Like we'll start the conversation. If all y'all don't talk to us, that's fine. We'll talk to each other. We'll still have a good time, but you can talk to us if you want. And that
benefits of having a pair.
Exactly. It's another one. Yeah. And that's actually been a really good benefit virtually too, trying to speak virtually, because it's like, wow, there's nothing. It's just silence. Okay, well, we're going to assume that landed and at least we had fun doing it. Like, cool. From the perspective of prep and that kind of thing, we are in and have been in each other's sort of like bubble, a person, like, so because we're obviously in the same physical place right now, there was no quarantine for us from each other. So that made it a lot easier because we could still, all of our prep and everything could be the same as it had been before. Whatever was in person before continued to be. That would be a lot harder if we had to not like only talk to each other virtually. But luckily we didn't have that as a concern. So that made it a little bit easier, but
yeah, sometimes good content comes from like sitting outside after the day is done and being like, this thing that I experienced today is noodling on me.
Yeah.
And being in person is really the only way to do that. Cause you're just like, I need to depressurize and like drink a beverage, like maybe a tea, maybe a scotch, whatever yours is. But you need to have that like depressurize with either no one or someone you really like time. And a lot of our good content has come from there. And that would have been so difficult virtually.
Yeah, because you can't, I at least cannot depressurize via Zoom or whatever equivalent it is. Like I can't, I have times now where I deliberately keep my camera off in meetings because I just can't be on camera anymore. I can't take it. Like, sorry, everybody, you can deal. Like,
but counterpoint, we have multiple touch points with very small groups of people to work on content in our day jobs. And we just have to be intentional about scheduling it, because before it would just happen. You run into them because you're doing the work and you're like, we need to talk about that thing that we need to do.
Yeah.
And it's intentionality now, I think, with being virtual. And then the other comment I would say is, because that engagement is so important, giving presentations to small groups is much better. Remote. If you give, it's like the old joke about source code. If you have someone review 10 lines of code, they'll find 50 things. And if you give them 500 lines, they'll say, good code, bro. It's just like that. Like if you give a presentation to 100 people and you don't have a very, very clear, we want to interact with you, and we're pretty good at it. We're probably not the best at it. People won't interact in a group of 50, but if it's a group of 8, you can have a really good conversation and everybody can benefit. And I don't know how to do that when a lot of the conferences are generally get 800 people in the door and sell a lot of tickets, or I don't know, whatever. I don't organize conferences. But like, I don't know how to do that, but I know that there's really a thing there about smaller interactive sessions. And you all are being great. Like I love the chat and the questions. So thank you for that. Because that means it's not just us being like, oh, how are you today? Wow, it's great.
So cool. Okay.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. It's so true. It's such a weird, and I feel like so many people in the virtual event space, I mean, us included, are trying to, navigate with that. Like, how do you build community in a virtual space? And there's a booming industry of platforms trying to solve for that right now, and trying to solve for that interactivity piece. And it's definitely critical. So we did have a question pop up from Dylan. What's the best way to connect with each of you?
Oh, well, we're on all of the social medias. I know all the Twitters. We're on Twitter. We're on LinkedIn. I'm easier to find on LinkedIn because my name is not Joshua Smith. I'm like, usually if you can find me, you can find him. Our email addresses, I'll put them in the chat here.
Yeah, and we also have a blog that you could send a link to that also has a form you could email us.
Yeah. So this is perfect. Yeah. Thank you for dropping that in the chat. Yeah. So we have 10 minutes left. So it's kind of like last minute questions that you have for folks. I kind of want to start us off though with talking about accessibility. And so we were lucky enough to have a 3-part AMA series with some of our friends at Accessible 360. And I know I learned a ton. So I'm curious when it comes to, and maybe it's different with virtual versus in-person events, but when you're thinking about planning out a pair talk, I think about something like, if you were on a main stage and had like an interpreter, right? Like, how are you making sure that you're not both talking at the same time? Like, I'm just curious, like, the question of accessibility, does that come into the planning process at all, or what does that look like?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I was in IT, and then I was home with my kids when my son and then my daughter were born for about 6 years. And then I went back to IT because I realized I was not good at being a stay-at-home mom. But in that in-between time, I actually went back to school for about 1.5 years thinking I wanted to be a sign language interpreter. So I am at least familiar enough with interpreting to know how it could be real complicated to try to interpret if people were in fact interrupting each other and talking over each other, which we definitely do. We have never had an interpreter at one of our talks, virtual or otherwise. And so it isn't a thing that we have really thought that much about. I will say that our slides tend to have all of the salient points of what we're going to talk about on them. We're not one for, we'll just put a picture on the slides and talk about it. And even though a lot of people have been like, you should do this with your slides, I'm like, I'm never going to remember what my points were if I do that. Like, no thanks. So that just sort of accidentally ends up that way, which is not the same thing as thinking about accessibility intentionally. So I don't know. It hasn't ever come up. So
accessibility is just like, okay, I know nothing about accessibility. I've never had an interpreter. But one of the things that we do is we look at each other and we make sure that we're on the same page and we're keeping up. And I would imagine that it would be a little like doing a 3-person partner talk than a 2-person partner talk, because I need to be aware of how you're doing, and if you're caught up, and if you're on the same page with me, and if I'm running out ahead of you, and making sure that we are in sync. And I think a part of that is just being aware of the other person that would be presenting with us if we were having someone interpreting. The other thing I'll say is we're very, I wanted to add a little detail about what you said, because we are both some amount neurodiverse. And I think we worked with a lot of people who were very, very neurodiverse. And some people had pretty strong audio exclusion, and some people had pretty strong, if you don't say what you say out loud, it doesn't sink in. Like, I can't read what you're trying to say. And so for us, we try to make the same points in a way that is written, in a way that is explained in at least 2 different styles verbally and in 2 different sections, so that people with different ways of learning and different abilities to process information can still get our main thrust, even if they learn differently or can't hear or can't see. That's really important to us.
Yeah, I think that's a huge piece of it. All right. We do have one more question kind of coming through, but like I mentioned, this is kind of last chance for questions. I'm curious if you have any horror stories from your years and years of doing pair talks together.
Ooh, that's a good question.
Animation always gets me.
Yeah.
I'm like, what are we talking about? I don't even know.
And I'll even be like, okay, I added animation to this slide. See, this is how it goes. And then by the time you give the talk, you forget.
Like, I get in like this like haze state of like, I'm in the zone and I'm thinking about the content, how to explain it, how to reach out to the audience. And then like, I have a horror story from today, which I'll share in a second. But then like something goes wrong with the technology and I'm just like, I can't, like we're done. I can't talk. And that happened today because either my computer is dying or Google Slides hates me. I'm not sure which.
Or both. It could be both.
Could be both. And I was giving a really exciting presentation this morning solo, and Google Slides just didn't work. And it was murderous to my brain. So those are my two. I don't know.
Yeah. And when that happens to you, it's actually nice if we are together because I can adapt much faster than he can, especially in the presenting moment, which means sometimes I get scattered and wander off into a different topic, and he's great at pulling me back on the actual like focus thing we're trying to do. But if something goes wrong in the focus track, I can fill time or whatever. And it's nice that way that we balance each other. Horror stories. There was once where we gave a talk and included a meme because we love memes and like Giphy and all of that kind of thing. And we're told after the fact that it was offensive. And I was like, what? What? And the explanation wasn't terribly clear, and they weren't terribly open to it being a conversation, because once someone has decided that something you've done is offensive, it's really hard for you to be like, but I don't understand why, and have that be a productive conversation. That one has stuck with me because I was like, I thought it was funny and now I don't understand. I think that's pretty much it. We take our jobs and what we try to teach extremely seriously, but also we don't take it that seriously. And I think we've learned that oftentimes what we say, people will have to hear from other places 6 times before it sinks in anyway. So if it doesn't go perfectly, it's not the end of the world.
Another good horror story is we had this talk we really loved and we gave it and there were no comments, just no comments.
Yeah.
And they looked at us like we were crazy. And what we realized, because that happened again.
Yeah.
And then we're like, what is happening? So then we talked to some people and they're like, this just blows up my mind. Like I can't react. Like I have to think 10 thoughts before I can even ask questions. And we're like, oh, okay. That made us feel a little better. Because at first, like dead silence, like people are just like, what have I done? Because it made sense. We were like, this is this is exactly how to talk about this topic. So that was kind of horrifying. I've had another one where
hold on, because there's questions and we only have 2 minutes. I mean, I love your horror stories, but we have questions.
If we have time, let's circle back to that. So Christy does want to know what's a favorite talk that you've given?
There was a talk that we gave where we used to work, which that's, again, a whole different AMA, that was the product of presenting how to talk about a strategy for an IT organization that I saw, like he had it as like a diagram, and I think it was going to be like a blog post or something. I'm like, this is not a blog post. This is a presentation. And that fight between the two of us was kind of early on in us being close. And it was like, no, I'm very sure about this. Like, this is amazing. And we need to tell more people about this. And then we did, and they got it. And it was really, really cool. So that was, I think, probably one of my favorites. Also the first time that we presented at UberConf for the No Fluff tour, because that was the first time I ever saw tech presenters, like who did it professionally. And I was like, oh man, it would be so cool if like someday I could do this, but that'll probably never happen. And then it did. And I was like, I have so many feels. So I probably those two.
My favorite. So yeah, we teach professionally, what we do, like there's a lot of titles we have, but what we actually do is teach how other people can do digital transformation. So that means teaching digital transformation and then teaching people how to fish. And so being able to teach how to communicate about what you want to do is really important. And that's why that talk is really, really good. I think my favorite talk is always like the one we just gave or the next one, because I just love the engagement. I love creating content in the process of like sculpting it with Lane. I think that's really awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, this question is a really good one to close out. Dylan had a question, and it is a little bit about parting advice, right? So how might people break through their fears to share in a broader forum?
That's a great question. And I wish that I could give you like a 3-part plan or maybe a 5-part plan, because I don't know why odd numbers seem better to me. It's probably a ADD thing, whatever, to like do this and this and this, and then I promise it'll totally happen. But I think my advice is, as always, be you and have fun and care more about teach one person, whatever it is that you want to talk about, whatever it is that you want to share. Teach one person and do it really, really well. And just kind of let that be enough. And then eventually somehow that always seems to lead to more opportunities in terms of actually like getting the chance to scale it. In terms of being afraid to scale it, I swear my best advice for that is find a good partner. Like there's no way I would be doing what I am doing, both for my career and also for speaking, like just speaking outside of my career, which speaking is a big part of it, but tangential, without having a good partner, because it's so much work. And I do struggle to just make content, like start something. That's very, very hard for me, even if I have a million ideas in my head. And also it is terrifying. It can be terrifying. Absolutely. So having someone who has your back and reminds you that it's like, it's just a talk, you'll be fine, like, or that your content's good or whatever. All of that's really, really helpful.
My dad told me if you're afraid, that means you're doing it right. That's something you care about. And then my sensei told me if you have fear, that means you're excited, and channel that excitement into focusing on the task at hand.
That's really good.
I don't have a lot of time, so
I love that. No, that's fantastic. Well, the thanks are coming in the chat, but I want to thank you both. This has been just a great conversation, super engaging. I learned a lot. Is there anything that you both want to plug before we say goodbye?
I don't think so. I mean, our blog is, like I said, we try to do it weekly. It's a lot of work.
We are here entirely to help you all. So if you have questions, reach out. We would love to help you. If you have more questions about pair talking or how to get started, and if you have successes in your journey, we would love to hear about them.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, we get discouraged sometimes too. So if someone gives a really kick-ass pair talk and they're like, that's because Josh and Lane talked about it in 21, please let us know. That will make us very happy in the future.
I love that. I love that. And one more plug for a forum for speakers of all levels. Mini Bar, we changed it to be in the fall this year. We're going to be announcing that date pretty soon. So I'll put a link to our mailing list in the chat here, just to make sure that you are up on that and connected and in the know. So
do that. The best way to get good at speaking is
practice.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you all so much. I feel like we could talk about this forever, but it's time for us to go. Thank you. And thank you for everyone who was able to attend. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. We appreciate it.
Yep.
Bye-bye.